Rabosai, we're here on Daf Ayin Ches, towards the bottom of the Amud, and we're up to the last line on Ayin Ches Amud Aleph. Besukami Boile. The Gemara had raised certain questions to Rabbi Lazar with regard to Yom Kippurim. And now the Gemara is raising an additional question. Until now, we've been focused on the issue of Inui on Yom Kippur, and then we jumped to a sugya about Bechar Behema Tahora. And the question was whether or not you need a special license from the Reish Galusa to allow you, to ordain you, for identifying a mum in the case of a Bechar Behema Tahora, as to whether or not it's a mum over or it's a mum kavua. Correct? So that was the whole discussion that they asked Rabbi Lazar. And that was the sugya we did on Thursday. Now we get to the following. Ma'ulatzes bisandal. Right, we know that nilas sandal is prohibited on Yom Kippur, but now we're going to talk about something called sha'am, shin ayin mem. So for that, we turn to Daf Ayin Ches Amud Beis. Now it seems that there's a less expensive kind of a sandal, a shoe, that was made of reeds, probably taken from the Sea of Reeds, Yamsuf. Do we say that it's not called a minnow or not? And therefore, if it's not a minnow, kind of like if I give the example of slippers, that you walk around the house in slippers, that's not a minnow, and therefore be allowed on Yom Kippur. Or should we say, no, this is included on the Ne'ilas Hasandal, and it's also on Yom Kippur. Now, Rashi here quotes a Laz. He writes that Sha'am is a kind of guma shekorim belaz poyai. Now, unfortunately, this Gemara, one of the drawbacks of this Gemara is that it doesn't have what's called a mitar game in the back. So if by chance you have a regular classic Vilna Shas Gemara, on the last page of Masechet Yoma, you should see a mitar game there. So he usually translates the Old French of Rashi into Yiddish or German. In any event, we're talking about reeds, R-E-E-D-S, that grow in the water. You've seen them when you go to a tiyul. I mean, Don, you do this all the time, but for us guys, we do it rarely, especially the last couple of years. And we go out to places where it's wet, marshland and so forth, and you see the reeds growing very high. And they take these reeds and they manufacture them into shoes, not real shoes, they're kind of less sturdy shoes than leather shoes. And the Gemara wants to know if they wear it, and that's in a certain society, that's the way they wear shoes on them. These are shoes on the feet. Then you don't need a leather shoe to be in violation of Ne'ilas Hasandal Yom Kippurim, even Shel Sham. The Aruch, Rabbi Nosson, who lived before Rashi, he's of the opinion that they took the barks of the tree, which is called Klipas HaEtz, and they processed it in a way that they could make shoes out of it. This reminds me a little bit of Holland, if you know what I mean. Wooden clogs. The Aruch offers a third interpretation, and he says that there's some sort of a tree, and it's not as soft as the reeds that Rashi writes about, or the poi in Laz, but then it's not as sturdy and tough and strong as a regular bark of a tree. Now let me just see if he adds anything to these reeds over here. He calls it a rush, R-U-S-H. I'm not that familiar with it. He writes that although leather was the standard material used in the making of shoes, a sandal could be made from other materials like rush, which are reed-like. Okay, good. That calms me down. So I don't know what a rush is exactly. Rush is probably a kind of a growth, and he calls it reed-like. Does it merit the halachic definition of a shoe? And this is relevant not just to Nilas HaSandal and Yom Kippurim, but it's also relevant to the mitzvah of chalitza in the case of Yibum, because it says in the pasuk of chalitz nalo mil, so she has to take off his shoe. Is this called a shoe? Which has tremendous repercussions as to whether or not she can marry anybody. So the Mishnah states that Nilas HaSandal is also on Yom Kippur. The Gemara wants to know whether this kind of a shoe, it's not your standard leather shoe, it's a reed-like structure, or can that be considered as shoes? Okay. I was wondering, just thinking out loud, let's say you ordered a pair of shoes and you paid good money from it. Oh, so Steve tells me that the bulrush is also disappeared. Can you send that one more time? It only stays on the right. The bulrush is also called a reed, mace, and cattail. Okay, so it's a bunch of Greek words over here, Latin words. In any event, Omad Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Nachmeni al Raglav Yomar Anira Isias Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Sheyotza b'sandal shel Sham v'Yom Kippurim. I can testify about Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi that he was lenient and he wore these kinds of shoes, these bulrush reed-like shoes on Yom Kippur, apparently publicly. Vaminole, and I asked him, B'tainis tzibur mai. Interesting. The Gemara assumes that the strictures, the prohibitions of sandal with regard to a tainis tzibur exceed and are more severe and more strict than that of Yom Kippur. So what happens is the rains are not coming down, chas v'shalom. So the Beis Din declares a tainis tzibur. Today is not really a tainis tzibur, by the way, in its strict sense. The phrase tainis tzibur is really reserved for a tainis geshamin. Most of Masechet Tainis, at least that part that deals with tainis, is dedicated to tainis geshamin. And on a tainis geshamin, there is a mitzvah of tainis, which includes even an Isser of Ne'ilas HaSandal. Would you, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, be willing to permit wearing a sandal shel sha'am on a tainis tzibur? My. Now, in the note that I have here, he applies a principle called Asu Chachamim Asu Chizuk L'Divrayim Yoser Mishal Torah. That often, when the Rabbanan institute an Isur, they are more strict about their Isur than the Torah is about its Isur. Because that which is midivrei sofrim needs chizuk. And this is so true even today. I mean, you'll hear people say, it's only the Rabbanan, we could be makil, that kind of attitude of zilzul in a Darabanan is so commonplace, so widespread, that the Chacham very often will impose greater strictures in the law with regard to a Darabanan B'divrei Sofrim than would apply to a Doraisa. And that's exactly what Rabbi Yitzchak asks Rabbi Shimon Levi, addresses him in the following way. Would you be willing to be makil even on a Darabanan like Tainis Tzibur? Maybe the Torah doesn't consider Nal or sandal shell sham as a sandal, as a nal. But that's only as far as doraisas are concerned. But as far as the Rabbanan, like Tainis Tzibur, we should be more machmir. This is what I call counterintuitive. By the way, if I asked you the question, the 17th of a Hebrew calendar month, does it have any special status in halacha? So you'll tell me, of course, today's the 17th of Tammuz. But that's not what I had in mind. The 17th of Cheshvan is a very significant day because a Tainis Tzibur will only be decreed as a public fast if the 17th of Cheshvan passes and the rains did not start coming down. The assumption is that by Sukkot time or shortly thereafter, the rains should be coming down in the Palestinian part of the earth, this area here. And we're going to wait for a couple of weeks to let the Ole Regel who came to Yerushalayim get back to home. But already it's Yud Zayin B'Cheshvan. A month has passed plus change since Chag HaSukkos, and there's no rain. So that's Yud Zayin B'Cheshvan. That's a Mishnah in Masechet Yoma. Omar Li, Rabbi Shimon Levi responded to me, so testifies Rabbi Yitzchak, Loshna, it makes no difference whether it's Yom Kippurim or whether it's the Isur of Nilas HaSandal and the Tainis Tzibur, they're all the same, and we can be lenient with a sandal shel sham. Omar Rab, we find this also in the name of Rabbi Bar Chana, Anira Isias Rabbi Lazar, Demin Ninveh. This is a particular Rabbi Eliezer who came from a city called Ninveh. Sheyotza b'sandal shel sham b'tainis tzibur. Now we have the opposite question. Okay, we were lenient in the tainis tzibur. That's because tainis tzibur is only midivrei sofrim. But Aminale, I asked him, Rabbi Lazar, Yom Kippur Mai, are you willing to go a step further and say that even as far as the Isur Torah of Neilas HaSandal on Yom Kippur, the Rabbanan would allow it with a Nal Shel Sham? Amar Li Lo Shna. There's no difference between a Tainis Tzibur and Yom Kippur. Interesting is that both Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi and Rabbi Lazar, they both came to the same conclusion that we could be makil as far as sandal is concerned with regard to sham. But the presentation was just in the opposite direction. In the case of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, they saw him wearing these Nal Shel Sham on Yom Kippur. So I asked him, what about Tainis Tzibur? In the second case, that of Rabbi Lazar, they witnessed him wearing a sandal Shel Sham on a Tainis, and they asked him, what about Yom Kippur? But both came to the same identical conclusion that Nal Shel Sham is mutter both on Yom Kippur and on a Tainis Tzibur. Now, this sounds like a great kula. Everyone's always looking for what they should wear on Yom Kippur. But in truth, in the overall picture, it's the chumrah, because Yibum requires chalitza, which requires a nal, which requires now a nal shel ar made of leather as opposed to nal shel sham. So if the chalitza was implemented with the Nal Shel Sham, she is still a Yavama L'Shuk. She cannot marry anyone. The Chalita is invalid. Rabbi Yehuda Nafik did the Hitni. They saw Rabbi Yehuda going out on Yom Kippur wearing a sandal of the Hitni. The Hitni is a particular kind of what do we call it before? A brush? What was the word we used? So don't tell me in Latin. Rush. So one particular type of rush, I guess there are different species of rush. One of them is called the Hitni. Don't hit me, but the Hitni. Abai Nofik bid the Hutzi. Another type of rush. Now in the Hebrew, he writes that Hutzi is Anfei Dekel. We're talking about a shoe that you make from branches, leaves, the leaves of a dekel of a date tree. Now, I never saw anyone wear sandalim made of reed like rush or sham, or for that matter, made of hutzi or hutzi or any of those, kind of leaves. I think I saw once as a child a movie or a television program called Peter Pan. Does that ring a bell? Steve is nodding his head, so at least one of us, besides me, remembers. Oh yeah, John too. I think Peter Pan. Don't quote me on this; I'll get in trouble. But I think he wore these kind of grassy leather, these kind of like branches, leaves, like leaves. But anyway, it seems that a pair of shoes that's made out of leaves, even coming from a date tree, perhaps, does not qualify as shoes, which is good news for Tainus Sibra and Yom Kippur. It's bad news for Chalitza. Rava Nafik, now here there's a Girsa problem, Biyable. Yable is actually a kind of a slipper that's made from grass. Rabbi Barafuna, I don't know why the Gemara feels compelled to go through each one of these cases. I mean, I guess the Gemara wants to show that there were so many Amoraim who excluded these various types of shoes. Rabbi Aravuna Korich Sudra Akare Vinofik. I don't understand the chiddush of this. He wrapped his foot in a kerchief and he walked around with it on Yom Kippur. Seems to be Pshita Michael Mashma. Now, the Ran has a problem in this sugya. Maybe we'll get a chance to address it, and that's called Masoy. Yom Kippur, if we assume, is Aser B'Hotzah, we don't carry on Yom Kippur, then anything that's not a shoe is not called a malbush, and by definition, it becomes a Masoy. So that even if you've solved the problem of Inui and the Nisem, and you haven't undermined the Nisem by wearing shoes, but nevertheless you're carrying something around in Rosh Hashanah in a public area, and it's not really tied down to your foot like a malbush, you're not wearing it, it should be a masoy. That doesn't address my question. What's the chiddush of wrapping your foot in a kerchief? And was there a Havamina that would be also? Just see, he has a footnote here if that would help me. He says a kerchief provides comfort. So if I understand what he's saying here, again, who's he quoting? He doesn't tell you who he's quoting. It's a stama of Artscroll. I think what he means to say, again, I didn't write the text here, is that there are two definitions of sandal. One is a Yom Kippur definition, which would apply also to Tainus Sibur, and the other is a Nal definition. Nal is something that protects the foot. If it doesn't protect the foot, the kerchief will not protect your foot. Might be very comfortable, but it's not sturdy enough to protect your foot, and it's not a Nal. But on Yom Kippur, where the Torah doesn't mention Nal, the Torah is just telling you the Inisem. If you put something on your feet that is comfortable and it cushions you, and you feel like you're floating in air, it's so nice, it's so comfortable. That's an oneg, and then your definition of shoe changes completely. It's not your universal definition of a nal; it's the Yom Kippur definition of a nal. Anything that makes your feet feel comfortable. You're not feeling the hard ground below you. That becomes a tainug, and it's the opposite of inu. So if you would ask me, was there ever a havamina that wearing a kind of a kerchief to cushion your feet would be appropriate for chalitza? The answer is absolutely no. It wasn't even a havamina. It's not a now. It doesn't protect the feet. You can wear a kerchief around your feet and you step on a nail, go to my son in Modi'in, to get emergency care. But if you're talking about Yom Kippur, there was a definite havamina that wearing, like, for example, I can show you here a pair of slippers I have. There's no leather in them, but they're very, very comfortable. They're this thick. That might be an oneg. I'm getting an oneg with a shoe that does not protect my feet. There's no hard leather, but it's comfortable. He says that on the day of affliction, we don't wear a kerchief because it provides comfort. In any event, that was the Havamina. Lamaskana. Again, we have to go through Shulchan Aruch, but it would seem that only that kind of shoe that protects your feet would qualify as a shoe of the Asur on Yom Kippurim. Now I'm a little confused because we mentioned the Aruch. The Aruch says that Shel Sham, which the Gemara Paskins here seemingly is mutar on Yom Kippur, is made of wood. Wood, it seems to me, would protect your feet. Rashi, on the other hand, is saying that Sham is a reed like rush, so that is soft and doesn't really protect your feet. But if it's made of wood, or the processing of a bark of a wood, see, I would be tempted to think that according to the Aruch, we have to add another condition to the Isur Neilas Hasandal. It's not enough to tell me it's comfort, like a kerchief. It's not enough to tell me that it protects my foot, like the case of eitz, of sham, which is a kind of a bark of a tree. But we need a third element, and that is a halachic legal status called now. And a nal is made out of leather, the hides of animals. You take a tree, and again, you cut out some wood and you fit it on your foot. Yeah, I can do anything I could fit on my foot. I could take a piece of metal and shape it so that it protects the bottom of my foot. Would that be a nal? I would say that according to the Aruch, it's not a nal, and you'd be allowed to wear such a thing. According, on the other hand, to the other Rishonim, who say that nal means protection, if you cut out something for your feet that's made of metal, and it certainly protects your feet, it might not be comfortable, could be that would be Asar on Yom Kippur, because it has the element of protection. The Aruch is saying, no, it's not enough to protect you. We need the formal halachic legal definition of a nal, which implies that it's made of leather, as opposed to a protective. So if you had Mali eights, Mali mateches, it wouldn't make any difference. It's not a nal. Mosiv Rami Bar Chama. He quotes a Mishnah in Masechet Shabbos. Well, let's just, before we go on, I want to mention the Ran. Again, the Ran says that how would we allow you on Yom Kippur to walk out with these various types of reeds, shoes, and so forth and so on? Again, if it's not a violation of Inisem, it should be a violation of Shabbos, because it's a Masoi. Meaning, if it's not a Nal, then it's a Masoi. Because a Nal makes it into a Malbush. But now he's not wearing it as a Malbush because it's not a Nal. So again, there's no problem on Yom Kippur as far as Inui is concerned, but what about Meleches Hotzah through Masa? So the Ran quotes the Ramban, who took this question so seriously that he decided, the Ramban, that in all these cases of the various Amoraim who wore these different types of sandalim, they only wore it inside the house. They would not walk out into Rosh Hashanah, because then, if it's not a minol, it's not a malbush, it's a masai, and they violate Meleches Hotzah. That's how Father Ramban went with this kash. In other words, all these types of shoes that they allowed you to wear on Yom Kippur, each amora l'shitaso, respectively, that was only for indoor wear, but not when you step out of the house. Because when you step out of the house, if there's no eruv, then you're carrying slippers, or I don't know what word to use. I don't want to use the word shoes. The Ran says, Lo mashma b'Gemara, it doesn't seem to indicate anywhere in the Gemara that when each Amora testified about another Amora as to what he wore on Yom Kippur, it means he was inside his house, and that Amora was wearing Nal Shel Sham in his living room, but he would take him off when he went outside. Doesn't seem like that. Ella, the Ran again goes a step further. He says the minhag of Yisrael is to wear these kind of shoes on Yom Kippur, even publicly. It's like sneakers, or what do they call them? Clogs. People wear clogs on Yom Kippur. Okay, so fine, there's an Eruv. Well, let's say there was no Eruv. So you're not allowed to wear clogs on Yom Kippur because you're carrying, it's a masli because it's not a minol. The very fact that it's allowed on Yom Kippur means by definition that it's also in a place on Yom Kippur where there's no Eruv. Says the Ran, Min hagam shall Yisrael lotzeis b'hem afilu b'shus harabim. With these reed-like shoes. And he says, Dafka b'Shabbos asur lotzeis b'chol davar she'eino minol aval lo b'yom HaKippur. Wow. Now, how can you justify this distinction between Shabbos and Yom Kippur? The same Isur Hotzah that applies to Shabbos applies to Yom Kippur. If you're telling me it's a Masur and you're not allowed to wear reeds without an Erev in Rosh Hashanah on Shabbos, how can you allow it in Rosh Hashanah on Yom Kippur? So I think there's only one possible answer here. And that is that your definition of Masur is relative. I'll give you an example. Let's say I go to the Canary Islands, I don't know, and everybody wears a Nal Shel Sham. That's how they walk around. You'd be allowed to wear it on Shabbos. What are you going to tell the entire society that you're not allowed to wear the shoes that you wear every day of the week? You can't wear them on Shabbos because it's Masur? The answer is it's not Masur because that's the way we dress. We don't take them off. We wear them on our feet. So the concept of Masur now becomes relative to what is accepted as shoe wear or footwear in any particular society in any particular period of time. On Yom Kippur, when we can't wear shoes, then we wear a Nal Shel Sham. Everybody's wearing a Nal Shel Sham. We become like the Canary Islands the whole year round on Yom Kippur. And therefore, it's not a Masur. Masiv Rami Bar Chama Hakitea. Oh, this is fascinating. Talking about what's called prosthetics, right? You're talking about a person who doesn't have a leg, and they attach something instead of a leg. Is that a problem on Yom Kippur? He's called a kitea, an amputee. Yotze b'kav shalo. Now, this is a Gemara. Actually, this is a brisa in Masechet Shabbos. We're talking about not the Isur of Nilas Sandal of Yom Kippur because of Nisem. We're talking about Masur on Shabbos. Forget about Yom Kippur. Yotze b'kav shalo. Kav is a prosthetic leg. It's made out of wood and it's shaped to fit the stump of his leg. And he's allowed to wear it in Rosh Hashanah on Shabbos. Now, if that be the case, we might want to come to the exact opposite conclusion about Yom Kippur. Because if on Shabbos it's not a Masur, it means you're defining it as a minol. And if it's a minol, then it's also on Shabbos. And if our definition of minol is protection, there's no greater protection than this leg. Divrei Rabbi Meir. So Meir is lenient, and on Shabbos he allows the kitea to walk through Rosh Hashanah with this attachment to his leg. Rabbi Yossi says, no, this is not called a minol. Not for you and not for the amputee never. And if it's not a minol, then it's masa, and you're carrying it in Rosh Hashanah on Shabbos. I mean, the first thought that occurs to my mind is, how is this stump attached to his leg? Is it just the weight of his body? And let's say the they build it in a way that it goes a little bit up on the sides of his leg, or do they actually strap it down? If there are straps coming from it and he ties the straps around, then I could understand that it's a minnow. It becomes almost like a permanent fixture to his body, and it's not a masa. He's not just carrying it. If on the other hand, he just puts his leg in it and he doesn't wrap it around with straps to attach it to his body, then I don't think that that could be considered a minnow. V'tani Allah, v'shavin sha'aso lotzeis bo b'yom HaKippurim. Now, wait a second. V'shavin means that there's no debate between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi as far as Yom Kippur. Even Rabbi Meir, who allows it on Shabbos, will prohibit it on Yom Kippur. I understand that according to Rabbi Yossi, it's prohibited on Yom Kippur because it's prohibited on Shabbos. No, just the opposite. Let's start again. According to Rabbi Meir, who says it's permissible on Shabbos, I understand very well the flip side of Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, it's got to be asur because it's only mutter on Shabbos because it's a minal. For him, this is his minal. There's no masui, and for him, it's a minal. He can't wear it on Yom Kippur. But what I don't understand is Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi should come to the conclusion that it should be mutter on Yom Kippur. Why? Because Rabbi Yossi says that it's asur on Shabbos. If it's asur on Shabbos, it means it's a masui, it's not a minal. If it's not a minal, then why should it be asur on Yom Kippur? And this has tremendous implications about Nal Shel Sham that we discussed. Because we should say that if it's not considered a Nal, then although logically you would have concluded that therefore it should be mutter on Yom Kippur, it should be asur on Yom Kippur, because Rabbi Yossi is saying that the kitea who's wearing a kav, it's not called a minnow, and yet it's asur on Yom Kippur. Then we should, by virtue of that logic, we should conclude that a Nal Shel Sham, even though it's not a minnow, should be asur on Yom Kippur. Omar Abaye. Abaye says, no, you're making, Rami Bar Chum is making a big mistake in his analogy. Hasam, in the case of a kav, the reason why it's asur on Yom Kippur is because even though it's not a minnow, the ispe ksisin, it has a certain pleasure to it. It's made of ksisin. Ksisin are soft, cottony type material. And therefore it's considered a tainu. So when you make this prosthetic leg for the amputee, you make it in the most comfortable way using ktitin. Anything that's made with ktitin, says Abai, is asur on Yom Kippur because it's a tainug and it's antithetical to the mitzvah of inui. However, if you're asking about Shabbos, Shabbos doesn't depend upon tainug or not tainug, whether it's inui or not. Therefore, in the case of Shabbos, you have a different question. Is it called a minnow? Is it not called a minnow? Rabbi Yossi says it's called a minnow. And asur. That doesn't mean it's going to be asur on Yom Kippur. It will be asur on Yom Kippur. But even according to Rabbi Meir, it will be asur on Yom Kippur. Even though Rabbi Meir says that it's not, that it's considered, just one second. According to, I'm sorry, I always get confused between the names. According to Rabbi Yossi, why should it be asur on Yom Kippur? If it's asur on Shabbos, it means it's not a minnow. If it's not a minnow, then ipso facto it should be mutter on Yom Kippur. Says Abai, no. When you're talking about a kav for a kitea that's made with ktitim, then you're talking about oneg, and on the one hand, it's going to be asur on Shabbos because it's not a minnow, but you would have thought that, well, if it's not a minnow, it's mutter on Yom Kippur name. On Yom Kippur, our definition of the Isur Nilas HaSandal depends upon oneg. And if they make the kav with ktitim, then it has that element of oneg, and therefore it's going to be asr on Yom Kippur. Okay. So this is where we'll stop for today. Everyone should have a Shavua Tov and a meaningful fast. Mitzvah Shem. Tomorrow we're back in the Emek Learning Center.